Greetings and welcome to my new calculus channel. My name is John Gabriel, and today I'm going to talk about a very old topic I've talked about in the past, and I'm going to explain it again for those of you who weren't around 7, 8 years ago. So my right eye is bothering me extremely today. I have good and bad eye days. Today is sort of a 4 out of 10 eye day. Let's begin. Now, what about limits? Do we need it in calculus? No, we don't need limits in calculus. Limits is a topic that can be studied in things like convergence, series, sequences, etc. But does calculus need it? Absolutely not. As I've shown you over and over again, with both the new calculus and an updated, rigorous formulation of your bullshit mainstream calculus, you no longer need all this nonsense about epsilon delta proofs and limit theory and all that drivel. So, how did the story begin and why does it continue? So, you see, math professors and teachers of the last maybe 400 years, especially, they're perfidious cranks and they've done nothing in that period of time. They haven't produced any progress whatsoever. It's just smoke and mirrors in order to buttress their unrigorous and bogus formulation of calculus. So they added a lot of things like Weierstrass epsilonics, where you compare distances through inequalities. And they had to do that because they needed to somehow come up with a way to show that Newton and Leibniz were doing things that were correct. They weren't actually doing things that were correct. They were doing things that gave them results, correct results, but they didn't understand why. So to cover their incompetence, arrogance, insecurity, their deep ignorance, jealousy, and of course, don't forget this, their incorrigible stupidity from their students and the world, they had to produce this drivel. Okay. So, how would they come up with it? Well, one way is to use the Weierstrassen definitions. Okay. And only the sycophants and the professional arse lickers who pretended to understand their endless drivel were the ones who continued to advance their theoretical research. Mountains of excrement upon mountains of excrement. Let's continue. So, why does their theory, their entire theory of limits, need something called a hole? They love holes, by the way, and their theory is full of holes, more than Swiss cheese. But it cannot be buttressed without plugging these holes. How? Well, naturally, being the apes that they are, they use their excrement. They have nothing else to buttress these holes. So you've all seen this definition below. I've modified it a little bit because I wanted to talk about the slope of the derivative. Usually all you'll see in here is like something like f of c, but I've changed it a little bit because this is how it would look for the tangent line slope. So this definition requires a hole to be possible. Can you think why this definition requires a hole? Well, look at these absolute values here. They're both greater than 0. See? So you ask me, well, what does a hole have to do with? Well, if you put a c in place of x there, or in place of delta here, what would happen? This whole inequality would go down a shithole. You know that thing you do every day? That's right. So this garbage Weierstrassen definition requires a hole to be possible at x equals c because both epsilon and delta must be greater than 0. In other words, a hole must be possible at c. Okay? And the prize apes thought they could buttress their syphilis initially by multiplying this particular series that you see down here, 1 minus x squared over 3 factorial minus x to the 4. It should actually be plus x to the 4 over 5 factorial, etc. They multiplied it by x over x, which is actually just 1, resulting in sine x over x, thereby making it indeterminate at x is equal to 0. So look at what they did. They took a series which was fully determinate at x is equal to 0. All you do is have to say, if there's no number in the x's, then the value of this entire series is 1. Doesn't their limit theory support that? Of course it does. Because if all the x's on top of the rest of the fractions here are no number, which that's what 0 means, it means no number, then the limit of this sequence, or the series rather, is 1. So consequently, the baboons had their first deception, okay? By considering their epsilonic definition above, they imagined this was an example that buttressed their bullshit. Okay, so they thought this. They thought now suddenly they have a nice little function, sine x over x, which is not defined at this point here. X equal to 0 and f of 0. Well, actually, truth is stranger than fiction because it is defined at that point. I'll get there and I'll show you why. So anyway, um, to buttress, they had to buttress again. In other words, one counterexample was not enough. They had more. They have another fancy one where they throw all caution to the wind and they say something like sine of 1 over x. Yes, yes, that's right. I know. They say something like sine of 1 over x. Let me ask you, people, do you know of any triangle that has an opposite side of 1 and a hypotenuse of 0? Well, of course, you're not going to be able to determine it in this case if x is 0, okay? So if you had to try to plug in a function into this applet, this GeoGebra applet, such as, for example, that one, okay, then then this bullshit is not going to, it's going to have a limit at 0 because a limit is defined as approaching from both sides, not just one, and the limit is 0, but you can't actually determine it. So this is one of the prize excrement examples that they'll use to deceive you. Don't fall for it. It's bullshit. And you'll see why in a moment right now that it's bullshit. Okay? So, um, how could they generalize the concept? They ate a lot of cabbage and they all congregated together in one stuffy lecture room where they passed a lot of gas. In other words, they farted. And the solution was then suffocatingly clear. Just multiply whatever the fuck you have by x minus c over x minus e. And suddenly a hole appears at C. A black hole appears at C. It was a very clever trick for most of the dotards, and they could easily justify it by claiming, and listen to this, claiming a function domain change. It's like, you know, that scene out of Star Wars where that guy with the Force says, it is enough, and that horrible insect creature says, no, it's not enough, and you can't just wave your hand over me and say it's enough. So, okay, function domain change, that's my response to the fucking morons called math professors and calculus teachers. No, I don't accept that. I'll be the insect. Zabulba, I think was his name. Oh gosh, I've got a fantastic memory. It didn't occur to the morons that in their classrooms there would be some John Gabriels, well, at least one at any rate, who would see through this bullshit. Their nightmare had just begun. Their identity element, also a load of bullshit, because identity element is something that arises out of that incredibly high shit heap called set theory. It suddenly had a dual nature. Sometimes it creates desirable holes, like the ones you see in their limit definition, and at other times in set theory, it's an identity element, meaning it doesn't change other elements when you perform certain operations on it. So these prize fuck ups who win Abel prizes and who win Fields medals are the ones who are stuffing this shit down your throat, and you're enjoying it so much and you're asking them to shove it up the other end of your body. Because why? Because you're morons, naturally. So sometimes it creates desirable holes and at other times not. Oh dear, why couldn't their damn theory fit the facts? Well, apparently Einstein answered that one for them. Okay. If the facts don't fit the theory, change the damn facts. Let's go to an example. So they took this example, one of the very first bullshit examples, in order to buttress their bullshit. And as I've just showed you, that example fails. Okay. Why does it fail? Because if you take a function like this, 1 minus x squared over 3 factorial plus x4 over 5 factorial minus dot dot dot, it's a series. And you multiply that. By the way, you can't really do this in algebra because algebra has finite operations. But of course, they've disregarded all reason and logic. But in any case, they can do this even though it's wrong, by the way, totally wrong. They can multiply by x over x. If you do that and you multiply just by the top x, then what you're going to get in there is sine x, okay? The Newtonian sine x. You won't get the Gabrielian sine x, which is in closed form, by the way, and far more efficient than any crap that your hero Newton could come up with, okay? Because Newton was like a little ape compared to my intelligence. Now, if you take that and you divide it by x, then you have what's called a reducible form, okay? Because this here is actually equal to, if this function were f of x, this function here, um, not before you multiply it, okay? So before you multiply it, so cancel that out. Before you multiply it, f of x is equal to this. So if you have this and you multiply it by x over x, like that, then you've got this reducible form here, okay? Sine x over x. And yes, it is defined, Jack Hazinger, when you have sine 0 over 0. It's defined because this, you don't do anything with this. Okay, you don't try to do anything with this. And no, you don't find limits in order to justify your bullshit and produce more smoke and mirrors. You don't do that. Okay, you don't take small values at the bottom and then say, oh, look, it's approaching 1. No, it's 1 because if you put no number in here, the answer is going to be, here you go, it's going to be 1. Okay? Right. So I hope I've illustrated that clearly enough for you morons. And if you try, of course, in GeoGebra and say, what is f of 0 there, it's going to tell you it's indeterminate because it's programmed by mainstream idiots. Okay? Now, listen, if you're not a subscriber, become a subscriber to my channel. I'm on your side. I'm telling you the truth. I'm making you smart. Study my historic geometric theorem because that will help you to understand why you do the things you do in calculus. The way your lecturers and your teachers prove stuff to you is not going to help you understand. You're just going to get confused. For example, they can't even give you a general definition of area. They don't know what area. They don't understand area. They don't understand volume. They don't even understand numbers. So how are they going to teach you these things? They're not. They expect you to memorize them. And here I am, busting my you know what, teaching you, telling you the truth, and you attack me. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Okay, that's pretty much it. Please subscribe because if you don't, I get less money. I can't enjoy the simple things in life, and I can only enjoy the simple things in life now. Because, there's not much a 64-year-old can do, especially one that's walked in my shoes. Better hope you don't have similar journey to me because I don't think all of you could walk even a quarter of a mile in my shoes. So that's pretty much it. I'm the great John Gabriel, and this is New Calculus Channel. Till next time, goodbye.